So we have done a variety of videos talking about and mulling around this Matthew 24 parable of the fig tree, preemptive pay attention. When you see this, know that the end is near. We talked about that a lot, and I want to share with you this really, really interesting article that I found over at Jerusalem Cornerstone Foundation. It was written back in November of 2014 by Gary Alley, Alley, and unfortunately, this article was removed. Why it was removed, I don't know, but I got it printed off, and I have been fascinated with it for the last couple of years, and I wanted to share it with you. It's pretty short and to the point, and it's not apparent in the English. You have to really hone in on the Hebrew. And I've seen at least one other source that agreed with the Hebrew and what it meant. And these would be the kinds of things with the prophets' writings that Jesus would have been mindful when he started talking about the parable of the fig tree to watch it. That when you saw this new growth and you knew that the end was near when you saw the leaves and the branch. And it was likened to this movement with Israel. And a lot of people have said, well, it's when Israel turned 70. And that may possibly be part of the backstory, but she turned 70 last year and the Lord hasn't come. And it was talking about the coming of Judgment Day. And then some people have talked about how there are scriptures, like Robert Breaker talked about this. There are scriptures that talk about after 70 years that the Lord would bring forth his will. So kind of with all of that in the backdrop and just kind of taking a pause for a moment and delving into the Hebrew, here is more research to tie in specifically Amos and Matthew 24, and really with the thesis of this, that the growth of this fig tree, meaning the end is near, meaning Christ is coming, it's negative. It's not positive at all. In fact, this article is entitled Israel's 7 Species. Big. And I said Gary Alley wrote it. Deuteronomy is a book of expectations, he says. In this final book of the Pentateuch, God strokes the Israelites' expectations concerning their entrance into the long-awaited promised land, while at the same time, he explains the rules that they are expected to follow at that time. One of these expectations is this agricultural bounty of the land of Canaan, often summed up by the so-called 7 species. And during the time of Jesus, only these 7 varieties were presented in the temple at Jerusalem as offerings of the first fruits festival, which is in Exodus 34:26. It says, for the Lord your God is bringing you to a good land, a land of brooks and springs and fountains flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of, and here's the count, wheat, barley, grapevines, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey, from Deuteronomy 8:7 and 8. So God is just going to bless this nation's socks, right? He's so in love with his creation. He's such a good God. The fig, he goes on to say, is a large, tenacious tree which bears a highly fragile, sweet fruit in the hot summer months. Keep summer in mind. The fig, or then he gives the Hebrew word for it, there's a apostrophe E-N-A in Hebrew, is native to Israel in the ancient Near East and is well known in many biblical accounts. So it's a major symbol. It is one of the fig trees mentioned when you go all the way back to Genesis, that opening account when Adam and Eve used its large, uniquely shaped leaves to sew for themselves coverings. The fig tree's huge leaves fall away with winter and slowly begin budding forth in springtime, right? Jesus had talked about that agricultural phenomena in that parable. And then he uses that as symbol to tell you about something else in the future that when you see it happening, you'll understand the end is near. And everything I've ever heard my whole entire life tags it as a positive that when Israel hits 70 years old, it's a good thing. But the whole context of the Olivet Discourse is that an Antichrist is coming, and that's 7 years, and it's a very bad thing. So where's the disconnect? Well, this article helps. So these leaves are about this construct of man fashioning for himself his own method of salvation. And is that not what we have been reporting, dear friends, over and over and over again, that the house of Israel is commanding, and on Elul 25, September 25th, there will be 70 nations that go before Israel. 68 of the 70, just as of a few days ago, with more to come potentially, are going to get into a covenant with Israel saying, you alone are our salvation. We're going to craft our own path of salvation. That's dangerous. That's a slap, slap, slap in the face of God on, of all places, Mount of Olives, exactly where Jesus would have planted it to have this conversation, warning the church, the Jews, the people that have been reading the Bible for 2,000-ish years, what would happen? Do you think that's by mistake? No, not by mistake. That ties in. Do you think that Jesus didn't know that the nations in Israel would be putting together this horrific covenant, slapping Jesus in the face and doing an animal sacrifice on the Mount of Olives? There's a connection point there. Our God is brilliant. So anyhow, he goes on to say, in the summer, a fig tree's leafy canopy provided a rather comfortable shelter from the blazing sun. The shade of a fig tree was used by rabbis when teaching their students. He gives the names. And perhaps Nathaniel was studying in its shade when Jesus first saw him, right? In the beginning of John there. I saw you, under the fig tree. And then Nathaniel says, oh, you are the Son of God, Jesus says, I'll show you way more than that. Don't get all excited about that. Yes, I can read minds. Yes, I can see in the future. Yes, I know what you were doing. And much more could be said about that. But to continue with the article, it says, along with grapes and pomegranates, figs were a common fruit associated with the land of Canaan. They were dried, stored as fig cakes, all these benefits of the fig. They were especially beneficial for tired travelers sitting under and eating from one's fig tree. Now listen, became a biblical idiom, a cultural way of saying peace and security. While the fig tree's decline or destruction, now listen to this, was an allusion to desperate and insecure times. Did you hear that? It could be an idiom for peace and security in a positive light, or its decline and destruction was an allusion, or allusion, Allusion, to desperate and insecure times. Now, the Olivet Discourse is about desperate and insecure times. In fact, he said it would be the worst time in all of human history. Did he not? It's a very negative picture. When cultivated for its fruit, the fig required consistent care. Some types of the fig trees needed to be pierced by the farmer to allow for fertilization. During the harvest season, a fig tree's unpicked fruit needed to be checked daily to prevent rot or theft. And besides being a cattle owner, the prophet Amos was also a fig poker or pricker. Amos was also a poet as well, probably because of, and this is where it gets really important, the fig's summer picking season. Another name for figs found in the Bible is summer fruit, and they have that in quotes, summer fruit. Now, summer fruit in the Hebrew is going to be spelled out Kaytz. So Kates, okay, so summer fruit is Kates. This Hebrew word Kates also means summer. So he's making a connection and correlation between summer fruit and summer. And it shares the same root word and sounds very similar to the Hebrew word for the end, which is going to be katz. Ketz, cats. Like all biblical prophets, Amos often utilized poetry and alliteration for his prophetic delivery. So get this. This is what Jesus would have had in mind when speaking of the parable of the fig tree. He expounded a vision given to him from Yahweh to Amos, where a basket of figs or summer fruit, Kates, Kaytz, alluded to the end, Ketz. That is to say, the destruction of unbelieving Israel. And of course, God is going to have an elect, even in the days to come of pain and heartache. He will call forth 144,000. There'll be a light to the nations. And then Zechariah 13:8-9 tells us 1/3 will be kept and found, taken care of, nurtured, watered, and fed by Yahweh during the tribulation, because God has this final end times, 2 more feasts for what I'm talking about, the end of the tribulation. I'm not talking about the Feast of Trumpets at this point. I'm talking about the Feast of Atonement, where they bawl their heads off to God. Go read Zechariah 12. It will show you all the peoples who just bawl like babies when they realize, oh, Jesus is the one and he just saved us from being annihilated. And then after a little cleanup, then he does the Feast of Tabernacles, which is your 1,000-year reign of Christ. Well, you need Jews in order for that feast. So that's what's happening. But the key points to realize here is that when you see this summer fruit, and we've been prepping you on this, and myself as well, summer fruit, bad summer fruit, the things that we've talked about, wiping Jesus out, subverting Jesus, and supplanting his ministry and his offer of salvation to the world through that Chabad House of Israel taking over with the UN, making an international court, and forcing a worldwide dominion of Noahide and Kabbalah and acknowledgement of just the God Hashem and nothing else. And death will ensue if you do not get on board with that. And then even if you do get on board with it, they're going to monitor everybody. And the moment they catch you breaking one of the Noahide, particular hatred for the Gentile from their own Talmudian words, their own sin, the Habadist Jews, they'll kill you in a heartbeat. And it's not so much just relegated to the threat of the Noahide. You really have to dig into these sub-laws. So when you see this summer fruit, this bad summer fruit of what's happening, this Israeli Bible that's pushed Jesus out, and now they're replacing themselves, forcing the world into worldwide idolatry, prepping for it very rapidly, and forcing this unpardonable sin upon the masses. When you see that bad summer fruit, then you know the end, the destruction is near. And it's not just relegated to unbelieving Israel, but you have this deploying of 21 judgments on the whole world as Israel sort of takes on this persona of Babylon, almost like Borg from hell, really, drawing the entire world into a hive mind with this technology and these, what the Antichrist does, the horrible evil, and they bow down and worship a robot god and a man who is connected to AI, as the Vatican has been pushing for a humanity 2.0. So when you see all that, the 7 years of the tribulation is forthcoming, and we're seeing that now. So it's time to really pay attention. The sovereign Lord, he says, showed me this, and I saw a basket of summer fruit. And he said, what do you see, Amos? And I replied, a basket of summer fruit, Kates. And the Lord said to me, the end, Cats, has come for my people Israel, and I will no longer overlook their sins. And that's Amos 1:2. So did you hear that last line? I will no longer overlook their sins. You know what that means? That means Jesus is getting ready to bring Judgment Day, and he fulfills on the Feast of Trumpets, which is called Yom Hadin. And there's much more that could be said about that, but the end of the article says one of Jesus's most famous prophetic teachings also alludes to the fig's relationship to, quote, the end and judgment. Jesus taught that when the fig tree buds, one knows that summer is approaching and its fruit will be ripe for picking. The fig is a seasonal reminder that God's judgment does not tarry. Learn this parable from the fig tree, for when its branches become tender and puts out leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things happening, know that it is near, right at the door. So Mark 13, 28 and 29, also Matthew 24, 32 through, you could go 35, and Luke 21. So it's not a good thing when that happens. It's a bad thing.